All right, I said this a minute ago. We try to be on time. So we're 2 minutes past 11. I like to do informal things. And Anna said there were 75 people that signed up. And we don't have 75 in here. So maybe we'll go more informal. That's OK, right? Like I said, informal. It always feels more formal when you've got the Madonna mic, you know. But stop and ask me anything, anytime, OK? Because it's not an interruption, because we're learning together. So I put this together, and I'll tell you who I am in a minute. And then I actually asked Rachel Borkhardt if I could change the title, and it didn't make its way in. But it's only a small title. So this idea of there are things you want to do. You want to do them anyway. And sometimes there are people that will help you secure the money. And so I want to spend some time really talking about how to secure that. I've got some case studies, things like that. But this is going to focus a little on teaching, scholarship, and supporting students. So not always kind of traditional, what we think of as research, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So I'm Bridget Trogdon. I'm your Dean of Undergrad Education and Academic Student Services, so UEAS. Even though we dropped the last S because otherwise it would have a rude word in the acronym of the unit. But I'm also a professor in the Baker School of Education. When I came to AU 3 years ago, I asked for review in the School of Education because that's the kind of scholarship that I do that I'm going to talk about a little bit. And this, even though I'm the undergrad dean, I think I'm bringing into this some like scholarly acumen, some administravia systems kinds of things, and also a real heart for service and making things better. My dad has an undergrad degree in sociology, but did not want to get into social work because of the paperwork, so he was a bus driver. And he has a hard time understanding what my job is. And he finally repeated it back to me about a year ago. He said, oh, you help find the cracks and you fix the cracks. I'm like, yeah, that kind of works in education. So that's a lot of what I kind of want to talk about a little bit today. So finding money for the things you want to do anyway. And I put a little overview, and I'm going to start at the bottom because I like to give people the things we talk about. And this is also part of Universal Design for Learning. So if you want a copy of these slides, it's a PDF. It also has a handout that is embedded within it. And so this is the bit.ly. If you're going to write it down, if you want to actually go on any kind of device that you have, it is case sensitive. So you just literally type in bit.ly/capital A, capital U, capital M, small AY 26. Okay? And it will give you everything. Or you can email me later, and I'll give it to you. And I think that the Center for Faculty Excellence is also sharing. So 4 things I really wanted to talk about today. I want to get a chance for you all to kind of talk and interact as well. And nobody's at a table by themselves, so I think we're all right. So just types of scholarship, a few case studies of things that have worked. And then we've got some worksheets, or I'm calling them scribble sheets, thought gathering, and then some kind of ideation pieces. So really want to be able to have a chance to go through those. And the first thing is this idea of the Boyer model of scholarship. And I'm going to kind of start with level 0, because some people might know this, some people might not. So there are things we think of as research. There are things we think of as scholarship. Ernest Boyer had a book, actually brought a copy, 1990, this idea of what is scholarship. And I just noticed it has a former colleague's name on it. I did not steal this. I had a colleague who retired, and he gave me his copy. But Ernest Boyer goes through 4-ish different kinds of scholarship. So a lot of times we're talking about scholarship of discovery is creating a thing, so that's often original research. So those who've gone through grad school, a lot of times this is what you'll do in a master's thesis or a PhD, an EDD, piece of practice, like those different kinds of things. And I think of that sometimes as new widgets, new tools, things like that. And then scholarship of integration often is considered doing research where fields converge. So we have so much of that at AU. This is the most interdisciplinary place I have ever been. I mentioned earlier asking for review in the Baker School of Education, but I think it could have been 4 or 5 different schools that I could have asked for review as a faculty member in, because we all do so many interdisciplinary things. And so we're doing research at places where those boundaries come together, synthesizing information across disciplines, within disciplines, across time. There's also a great book. I'll leave this up later if anybody wants to read it. This is one of the hardest books I think I've ever read in my life. Robert Frodman, he's a philosopher, and it's Theories of Interdisciplinarity, Sustainable Knowledge. And it's the idea that we already know everything we need to know, but we need to put it together in different ways. Really, really interesting kinds of things. So we do this really well at AU, as well as the Scholarship of Application and Engagement. And I think I'm going to talk some about that today and some different options and case studies, because when you're looking at doing applied research, finding money for things you want to do anyway, often it's at that intersection of application and engagement. But it does apply this rigor and of disciplinary knowledge and expertise to specific kinds of issues or problems. Sometimes people call this the Scholarship of Community Engagement. It can get a little messy. Boyer uses a term that I really like, and I gave it some quotes, service to the nation and the world. And that's a lot of what we do. At AU, our mission is to create public servants for, promoting American democracy and other kinds of, peace and justice around the world. And so I think those two, integration and application engagement, can intersect a lot. AU's track grant specifically, I know there was just a session in this room earlier also about funding, and I think they focused a lot more on that green part of application engagement. The track grant also crosses those middle pieces. And then the other is just this idea of scholarship of teaching and learning. So how is it that we're studying teaching and learning processes? And that can also include the bigger, larger, holistic things like student belonging, accessibility, accommodation, all of those different issues, because that's part of how people learn. Okay, so I wanted to go through just a couple case studies, and in talking with the organizers of this, we thought this might be useful. And these are some projects that I worked on in the past before I got here. And in coming to AU, the person who hired me, Peter Starr, stepped down. We had an interim. The president left. I mean, there's just been a lot moving around the last couple of years, and I feel like just as a scholar, I'm just now starting to get into this, what are my colleagues working on and how can I help? And so I am talking about some projects that I worked on before AU, but want to be able to work with other AU people. Actually just submitted a very small grant with the math department last Friday. With the networked community, have a meeting later today about one that's going to help with some of our nonpartisan voter engagement. And so, I'm just now kind of starting to get into this and want to talk about that a little bit. So a couple case studies, and it's not like, here's this great stuff. It's how did we do it, right? How did we get this to work? So this is one example. So this was a project from the USDA. I don't know if AU applies much to USDA. I'm looking at, so yeah. Their funding has really not been cut right now with the feds. I'm looking at you, Laura, right, yeah. And so these are things to think about. So they actually have a program called REEU, so it's Research and Extension Experiences for Undergrads. And this is something, this project just ended. It was 5 years, $500,000. We put all the money towards students. And what we had found, and this was when I worked at Clemson, which is a large public land grant, we did have a food science program, so students could actually major in that. At AU, it would be things more like chemistry, biochemistry, environmental science, biology, all the other different kinds of areas, public health, et cetera. So we wanted to do more with active learning anyway, and we looked in and found some institutional data. So like, for example, students who declared that major were very likely to stay in it, so they weren't moving. So a lot of times as students change majors just across different institutions, they leave credits behind that don't apply toward a degree. And so the students who were declaring the major were doing really, really well, but there was capacity for more students. Okay, I'm gonna pause for a minute. I think if AU will be going through some program review in the next year, and we're going to have to make some decisions about where we're putting our resources. There are some units that have some capacity to grow. So these are things to think about. Okay, and then we also use some of our institutional data. We were looking at active learning in classrooms, student HIPs. So these are high impact educational practices. I'm not going to go into totally what those are right now, but they are things like internships, living learning communities, undergrad research with a faculty member, study abroad. Those are the things that really help students be successful after college. And then we also were really interested in the preparation for jobs. So we had deployed the NSE, so the National Survey of Student Engagement. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And we were able to disaggregate the students who were interested in the areas that USDA funded, who they were less likely to participate in internships. We had that comparative data compared to students in fields like engineering, et cetera. They were less likely to be part of academic learning communities, which give that cohort feel, and they reported lower experience with job and workforce knowledge and skills when graduating. So we're like, uh-oh, okay? So if you can find a gap, sometimes you can find some funding. So what we did, we actually worked with the curriculum and added more project-based learning earlier into the curriculum. A lot of times institutions will save the good stuff for the junior and senior year. At AU, I don't think we do that, like especially our complex problems classes for our first-year students are really, really great. I think there are some ways we can improve those. But you know, we looked at the curriculum. We actually embedded industry credentials in the curriculum. So students could get their SafeServe certifications. So different kinds of industry certifications they could get in the class. And we also kind of embedded extension, so had some community-based partners, especially if there were cottage industry, like if you know, somebody had a really good grandma salsa, and everybody, I'm not kidding, there actually was a grandma salsa, and they wanted to be able to make this into a small business, but they needed some help with testing to make sure that it was shelf stable. That's something that's great for students in applied science classes to do. And then we actually worked with, brought the industry people in as well and created some final projects, and this was really cool, where we created an escape room. And so using a food science lab, set it up like an escape room where they had to find all of the food violations in order to escape. And then actually took that, incorporated that into training for industry experts, because otherwise job training can be really boring. I don't know if anybody's ever sat through it. You basically sit all day and somebody goes through a PowerPoint. You're like, oh my God. But it actually made it a lot more interactive. And that's what my collaborators were working on. What I worked on was the internships. We had paid internships for students. So that's most of the money that we used. It was over half of the money. So students all had $6,000 paid internships. We recruited mentors to work with them. And then I met with the students every couple of weeks, and they were creating a career competency portfolio. So actually going through things like the NACE career competencies. I'm not going to go into those a whole lot, but these are things that we know that students need in their jobs. So experience with communication, ethics, management, leadership, professionalism, et cetera. And they actually built a portfolio on that, which was really interesting. This also supported a graduate student. It supported some travel. It supported some materials. But one of the biggest things was the students themselves. And this also could spur economic development. We had some small breweries that students could work at. So yeah, I had a grant that paid students to make beer. That's kind of fun. But it was very much connected in with their disciplines and then the economic development in different areas. And I got a lot of happy little friends working in these microbreweries throughout the Piedmont. So this is just kind of one example, and I wanted to talk about this because there are things we wanted to do anyway, right? Improve the curriculum, improve the student experience, make sure that they had mentored internship experiences, putting them in a learning cohort, all of those things, and we were able to connect that in with a government grant. So that's one of the case studies in the how. Pause for a minute. Anything anybody wants to talk about? Question? Because I said we'd be workshoppy too. We'll get to that in a minute. All right. So this one is a little bit different. This was a networked opportunity. So there was funding from the Gates Foundation, and the Gates Foundation did not want to give money to individual universities. This happens a lot, actually, where they'll give funding to a larger group instead, and then the larger group works with their network. This is actually this grant that we submitted last week with math. That's what that was. But they had an Intermediaries for Scale project that was facilitated by an organization, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. And so we had 3 years in a networked learning community of about 16 universities, but they also gave us a small award, so $35,000. And I try to not turn up my nose at small money. I was just saying this to somebody earlier. $35,000 is not going to run a core research facility, but when your food budget is $2,000 a year, it makes a difference. And so this was what we wanted to do anyway in data. And we actually used this initiative to come in and get some institutional data. So we did something called the Institutional Transformational Assessment that was created by the Gates Foundation that let you see where your systemic problems are. And then we were connected with different networks. So the Every Learner Everywhere works on pedagogical improvements, and the Advising Success Network works on advising improvements throughout undergraduate education. And so it gave us access to collaborators that we didn't have to pay for. Basically, we were able to have consultants that we could work with that were part of this grant. We didn't have to then incorporate that money somewhere else, incorporate it in our budgets, sign all the MOAs. I don't know if there are any business people here. The procurement process can take a little bit. We didn't have to do that because they did that for us. And so what we did with the money, it actually gave us direct money to work with faculty, supporting faculty development, travel for learning, especially for advisors and advising leaders. They were able to go to conferences and learn more about improving practices. And then we were able to also support some graduate students with the money from the data analysis. So this is just another example of kind of a case study of finding money for the things you wanted to do anyway. Work on systems, how can we better improve students' access to education? And this was a good example. All right, so third one, and I don't think I wrote big ideas for that one because I can just talk through it. So this is one that dealt with transfer students. And this is one thing that with the federal government's priorities, transfer students are still very much a priority. I didn't put this in the slides, but this is all coming. And so these are things for us to think about. All of the middle state standards are going to be changing this summer, focusing a lot on workforce development and on how we ensure transfer student success in and out of institutions. And AU is actually working on improving transfer into AU for students at a two-year college in particular. The Office of Admissions has been working on this. They've been lowering the tuition, so improving the discount rate for those students as well. So this is something that I worked on with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and this was also a networked partnership. So we were part of a larger group of institutions that were examining partnerships between 2-year and 4-year institutions. And what we really wanted to do anyway, we were realizing that transfer students had lower success rates in continuing gateway courses. So this is really kind of STEM specific, but it can also impact other disciplines. So students who would take Calc 1 at a 2-year college and then come in and take Calc 2, they were failing Calc 2 at 82%. Youch. I know why, and we addressed it, okay? But that was an issue. If they took Gen Chem 1, Intro Bio, Physics 1 at one institution, they would come into the other because the books aren't the same, the curricula are not aligned, the faculty are not using the same things. And so what we did was actually took the money and created faculty learning communities that included future faculty, so PhD students and master students who wanted to teach, with 2-year gateway course faculty who often were not even that far away. So for us, it would be equivalent of working with faculty from Montgomery College, PG Community College, UDC's 2-year college program, NOVA, et cetera, and then 4-year gateway course faculty. And like one thing we found, for instance, in calculus is the 4-year institution faculty were not letting students use calculators at all. The 2-year college faculty were. And so guess what happened when the students came in and then they had to apply formulas and things and they couldn't use calculators. And so we worked on some pedagogical alignment, some actually getting the faculty together to work on those things, the assignments, the things that they were doing. And then this actually led to 3 other NSF grants on student improvements, kind of regionally and nationally. One of those, I'm still frustrated. It was a $10 million grant, worked harder on that than anything. They funded 3 and we were number 4. I'm still upset about that. So these are just kind of three case studies. And the thing that I think about, with these tips is sometimes it can be really helpful if there's something that you want to do in this area of scholarship, teaching, student success, find a partner. I can't do anything alone. I need a partner for everything because they hold you accountable. They can, they know things you don't. I don't see them in here, but librarians are fantastic partners. They know everything and everybody. And so library faculty are really, really good. So I find it really helpful to find a partner. Got anything on there. And second thing, find a gap. And so that's where a lot of times if you're thinking about something you're experiencing, and I got a worksheet I want to go through in a minute, but something you're experiencing, is this a thing? You know, where's their data behind it? And I will say Richard Larberg, who is our senior analyst in undergrad education, we will help you all if there are things AU-wise that we can help you with finding data on. I also talked to OIRA, and they're also very interested in knowing what are people's research questions, because a lot of times rather than sending out a new survey, we have that data already. Talk about that a little bit later in the ideation part, but if you can find a gap. So this is why, you know, I wanted to tell the stories, like with the USDA grant, we had data that showed that the students, and we had capacity in the program, but there were some ways that we could make some improvements to improve the internships, the living learning communities, the curriculum, and the job preparedness. So that was a gap to address. And then find a way to elevate a problem. So if there's something that you think is going on, but you don't know if it's systemic, this is something we did with the Gates Foundation project, was really looking overall across the institution, where were the places that we needed to improve? And it was in some of those gateway courses and in the advising support for the students and the advising infrastructure. So sometimes those can be things that can help as well. I don't see her here, but we've got one colleague in my division who has created an instrument that can work with students on measuring their capacity and aptitude in doing community-engaged scholarship and community-engaged research projects. That's a way of elevating the problem when you know that there's some data that you can gather for that. And then I don't have a great example of this, but I have to put it in. Sometimes it's just like, that's not supposed to happen. So I didn't have that in the case study, but if we're thinking scientific method, et cetera, sometimes there's something that you weren't expecting, and then you dig into that. In my undergrad dean hat, you all have no idea how much stuff crosses my desk every day. It's a lot. And I remember seeing something recently for a student who was asking for to not be academically dismissed. And I looked at the student's record and I said, the student was part of a program that was meant to catapult them into success. Why is the student getting dismissed? And so then actually Richard and I started digging into, I'm not gonna out the program, but we started digging into the data and actually realized, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Maybe this program needs some more oomph to it. You know, are there things that we can do to better support these students? Because we also can't, you know, spend 6 weeks with a student and overcome a lifetime of underfunded and racialized public education, you know, and so sometimes those are things that can really, really help. So those are some of the things that I think of with those case studies, and I wanted to give a chance to give everybody kind of a worksheet and scribble sheet, because we said this is not just me talking all the time. I wanted to give you some ideas and things to think about, and I've got some, and there are lots of these, so if you want to take extra copies and work on another project, that's okay too. So there are 5 questions on here, and wanted to give you a couple minutes to just kind of work silently, do some scribbling. If you've got a different notebook, you want to use that. If you want to use a computer, if you just want to do it in your head. If this would have been a smaller group, I would have brought some little whiteboards, but just a little scribble sheet with some questions. And if you have if you downloaded a copy of all of these slides, it also has an electronic PDF embedded in it. So if you want to work on this more later, that's okay too. But I'm going to give us 5 minutes to think, and then we can do just a little workshopping. So the 5 questions on here, and you can go in any order, wherever you think it might be useful. What research questions do you have? Some people start with that. What are you curious about? I like this middle one. What is something that irks you? There are also less polite ways of saying that. What is something that irks you in your professional tasks? So this is something I tell grad students too, if they're trying to figure out what they want to study, what are the things that make them mad? You know, what are the things that have a strong reaction? Because that means that's something you care about. So this might be about students, pedagogy, opportunities, disciplines, societal problems, et cetera. How do you know it's a problem, right? Do you have qualitative data, quantitative data? What do you want to do about it? You know, do you have ideas, interventions, things you want to do? Who might you be able to work with? How might you fund it? We'll keep adding to these too as we go through some ideation. But yeah, if you want some more coffee, grab some coffee, but let you work silently for about 5 minutes. right, we got about another minute. Okay, so if you will humor me, I would love for you to just talk to the people at your tables for about 5 more minutes. What did you think about? What did you work on? Because part of the goals of today is also networking. So about 5 minutes. Not everybody has to go if you don't want to, if you're still fleshing out some ideas, but start anywhere on there. What did you write about? I'm going to kind of come around, but about 5 minutes. Okay.
Those are easy to address.
What have you all been working on? Scribble sheet.
Yep. I went for a repeated irk of mine from 20 years here. Lack of institutional support for experiential learning activities for small groups of students outside of class time and outside of regular semesters. I.e. taking a bunch of students to Costa Rica, taking my marine biology students for the weekend to the coast. They pay for it. They always have. And so how do I know it's a problem? Repeated unsuccessful attempts to facilitate and carry out said events. Huge amounts of lead time required when often,
That's true.
and even to get to know after a long time. What do I want to do about it? Streamline processes and permissions, have a fast track process, and stable, knowledgeable staff. Working on a problem trying to get students to Costa Rica for a year now, we're not dealing with the same people we started with. And this is at the college level, not necessarily at the institution level. Who might fund it? Donations from alumni or donors, maybe specifically who are interested in experiential learning. Perhaps President's Office, many of these things are extensions or applications of his civic life initiative.
Yeah.
So that's something I've run into repeatedly, and I haven't been able to solve that problem in 20 years.
I'm listening.
What research questions do you have? How can we improve science education at every level? Why? Congress, cool. Anti-vaxxers, climate change deniers. I mean, the big problems that we're going to face, have been facing and will face for another 150 years are, I'm not going to say all, but almost all science-based. Microbial evolution, accelerated microbial evolution, climate change, one, loss of habitats. It goes on and on and on and on. The tilt of the earth, for heaven's sake. No pun intended. So, we need people, in my view, we need people who are making laws and policies. They need to understand science and how it works, understand data, understand how this information is collected. And it's not just about making the best argument, which seems to be the majority of people in Congress, the Senate, and government are lawyers. Data is not something that seems to be valued. And hopefully to start at the very bottom, high schools and undergraduate colleges, I would like to see if the DOE can fund it, if NSF can fund it, NIH maybe, USDA can use some, and I don't know about the Department of Defense, but the first three.
Yeah. The scientific enterprise. Yeah.
Yeah, but, well, it can be slow to happen there. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to sort of start from the high school level.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
people don't understand.
You need to look at the current makeup of the Congress and find out what degrees and career paths that they came through.
Oh, I
And
did.
It's very low. Well,
And you would
several.
need to target
Yeah.
education at
Yeah.
the beginning of those career paths.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah, what were you?
So I started with the research questions. We have similar concerns on my different topics. So my research questions are threefold. These are my interest now. I can do them for the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center. So are the talking points of the anti-critical race theory rhetoric of the conservative politicians supported by empirical research? I'm thinking no.
That's why I rolled my eyes. Yes.
But because we're scientists, we have to consider it. So I say, if so, how can educators teach truth on hard history, race, and racism better? And if not, how can the ARPC's academic research support those who are raising the legal battle, to get against the CRT ban? So the ACLU is taking the lead on that. And what I'm hoping is that our research can inform that work.
Yeah.
But my biggest pet peeve is that CRT is illegal, and it shouldn't be. It's just like a theory, you know what I mean? It's like a theoretical thing. So government funding is very difficult for us.
Yeah. And that was a talking point I meant to say earlier. I'm going to loop back to in a minute. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I'm trying to rotate a little, but yeah.
Yeah.
You'll keep talking. Okay.
And I'm particularly resistant to experience. So right now we're doing encounters, but many options.
We're a small group of two, but it looks like we've got things to talk about. Okay. I just need to make sure everybody's got it. Okay.
Different variations of encounters.
We'll have some good things to talk about over here.
Workshops. Yes.
I'm really interested in what would it be if we were to create a neurodivergent student support program, which isn't always, they're not always using student disability support.
Right.
And crosses a lot of different areas of the student experience.
Yeah, we were talking about how well, at least I was talking about how we just kind of need to change the curriculum for a lot of courses because it's just inherently inaccessible. But there's just kind of a lack of understanding about that from a lot of professors.
Yeah.
The way is so much different than even 10 years ago.
The UDL pieces.
I feel like we're not.
Yeah. A lot going on.
That's right.
Conversations are really good, but like one more minute. Okay.
for this. Share this feedback.
All right, I'm going to gather your thoughts back up. Hate cutting off good conversations. Continue to network over today. Go to lunch together, things like that. Are there a couple tables that just one person wants to say something that, that they scribbled on their scribble sheet? Any one table want to start? And I will bring you a microphone, because using a microphone is an accessibility issue. Yeah, Sarah. And just say who you are.
Oh, I'm Sarah Trembeth of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center. And the one thing that our group had in common is that we have different research areas and different research questions, but common concerns about the government's recent changes to funders and to funding. So my scholarship is in critical race theory, so we know what happened to that, right? And my colleagues here, their research is in biological and environmental sciences, so we're struggling as we think about how to fund our projects that have been politically motivated to defund.
Yeah, and so that can go in several different places, including right in the middle, what irks you, Yeah. All right, one other table? Anything you want to share? Everybody talks until you get called on, and then okay, thank you.
I mean, like, just building off of what you
who
all
you are.
shared over there.
Just introduce yourself.
I'm so sorry. My name is Stacy St. Louis. I'm an assistant professor in justice law and criminology. And we spoke about private donors and nonprofits and how some of them filled the gap in terms of funding projects that were cut short by the federal government, but have not necessarily continued to fill that gap by producing new funded research that aligns with what we would previously seek funding for under federal initiatives. And we also spoke about how competitive the foundations and nonprofits are, and we just kind of reflected on that a little bit more with no solutions, sadly, but maybe you have them now.
Yeah, well, we'll do some more ideation, but yeah, it's rough out there right now, kiddies. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right. Last comment, and introduce yourself too, please.
My name is James Biddle. I'm the new Arboretum manager here at AU.
Ooh,
I started in
love it.
February. I'm constantly butting my head into the institutional divide between operations and academics. I am really excited to start this job because there is a mandate to break that down in terms of what our landscape looks like, our garden looks like. But I've also I'm struggling to figure out what our mandate is, what it does it really mean that like we're an arboretum, beyond just a tagline that we tell people to are in the school, and also just trying to find unique, unconventional relationships with staff, since we're not like a land grant ag school that's relevant to our arboretum designation. So
Awesome. I love that you mentioned that. Environment pieces, right? I mean, and then when I give tours of campus, I always like to point out, oh, here's a place where you can come pick some sage and take it home and make some sage brown butter sauce for dinner. I'm from Kentucky. The Derby was last week. I might have harvested some mint off the back end of McKinley for some mint juleps, right? And that's what it's there for. But yeah. Well, and I want to say too, how many of you in here consider yourself a staff member? Right? This is important because we're an academic community regardless of where we are in our roles, and there can be so many ways that staff work with faculty, staff work with staff, faculty work with faculty, like working across different areas of expertise and interest. And the more we can learn what other people are interested in, the better we are. That's the kind of the find the partner piece. So I'm going to cover a couple other resources, and again, I'm going to start as though people don't know what these are, and if you are, that's okay. Some people like to use logic models. I'm actually pulled this from the University of Mississippi. I find it useful to kind of organize what I'm doing and where we're going. I don't always use logic models, but this is sometimes what they look like. If you want to start anytime in a project, you've got your inputs, your outputs, and your outcomes. Anytime you have sponsored research, you're going to have to show how you did was effective. And what you did, and sometimes you have to change the things that you're doing. So these are just some of the things that you think about in going through those components of a logic model. So some people like those. Just wanted to throw that out there in case you've never thought about it. And this is not great. You can literally Google theory of change. And sometimes, too, people come up with theories of change which are related to logic models, not always the same thing. What's the problem? Who's your audience? What's your entry point? What steps do you need to do? How do you know it's going to work? Like, what would these impact? What's a long-term change? So those can be really useful too. I just gave you the scribble sheet as one way of looking at it. Sometimes I will have a big whiteboard meeting with myself. Like, I will literally go find a big ass whiteboard and just multicolored markers and draw it all out. And it helps me kind of put things together. So these are just a couple tools that people use. I did want to talk some about ideation. And please, if you've got a comment or a suggestion or a resource or something, just raise your hand and share it with the group. And I did this in line with these 4 pieces. So the first is just this idea of find a partner. And I think too, like I love how people were talking about federal. I'm not talking about federal a whole lot because it is really, really competitive right now. But there can be alternate ways of looking for funding sometimes. Look at professional societies. What do they care about? What do they fund? I have gotten money before from the local section of the American Chemical Society for doing an alternative career symposium for students. We're members of Transform Mid-Atlantic that looks at different community-engaged partnerships. So think about professional societies. And I mentioned a disciplinary one, but there are also larger groups. Like many advisors are part of NASPA. We have a number of different things. So what local or national nonprofits do you connect to? There are 14,000 nonprofits in the DC area. Laura, I don't know if you know the other numbers, but there are a lot of them, right? And so are there nonprofits that are doing things that we care about? And sometimes you're not going to get millions from a local nonprofit, but you might be able to get smaller amounts. People pay dues. Institutional memberships. And as I was putting this together, it made me think, I need to ask the president's office what all they pay for, because I think there are some that President Alger has signed us up for that I didn't know about. But the ones I do know, so we are institutional members of AAC&U, so the American Association of Colleges and Universities. They don't always have grant projects, but they routinely have things that we sign on to. Like, we've been part of a cohort working on AI for the last few years. Anna Olson is part of that. Allison Thomas is part of that. Mike Pillar, who works with academic technology, is part of that. Several faculty members. We're members of Campus Compact, so they work on community-engaged projects and service learning. We're also part of a smaller group that's called Truckin', and it's literally the Research University Community Engaged Network, and they have a lot of different partnerships that come in together. They actually have some calls out right now on using some large-scale instruments on institutional change, like if we're talking about doing more with community-engaged learning. And the best thing to do is just get on their listservs and see when things come out. We're part of an Aspen Institute American Talent Initiative. So this is really intended to improve equitable access to education for college students. And they like to work with universities that are doing good work. So they've actually opened that up to a number of private universities. So we're now part of that. So part of the 2-year, 4-year partnership project that I talked about, we're now working with Aspen Institute on this. All the money comes from Bloomberg, okay? He's got tons of money, right? And so that really helps us with some networked things. If you all didn't know, there's some memberships that I pay for in our budget every year, but that are for everyone at AU, and I put a couple things I wanted to click on. So URU is the Association of Education at Research Universities. So there are 187 research universities around the country. We talk to each other all the time. When Canvas went down last week, I was talking to my counterparts nonstop for about 24 hours. The CUR, so we have not been members. I'm signing us back up again. This is the Council on Undergraduate Research. They have a lot of different resources. They have some money sometimes as well. The Association of General and Liberal Studies, which is more of a network. Imagining America, this is new. This is a group that's especially for humanities and arts and public life. So basically anybody in CAS, I think you'd be interested in this, COM. And they also have fellowships. So added a couple links. And again, I'll pull the slides back up later. All right, now I've got to drag this over. So Imagining America, they have fellowships for publicly active graduate students, they also have an undergrad version. And so these, we pay for this membership, and so we want to make sure that our students are able to apply as able. So this one is the joy of giving something, and this is for undergrad students. So these are awards that might not be specific for research like we think about, but that can be very useful. And the reason I put URU is there are a number of networked groups. This one sometimes takes a second to load. I might pull up. But they have a number of different listservs, including some on advising, on AI in the curriculum. It's making a liar out of me. I'll check it back on that one in a second, because sometimes things just don't like to load. The other thing is, think about professional societies you might have joined at one point. Phi Kappa Phi is a scholarship society, and they regularly have money, $2,000, $4,000, a lot of times for grad students, for undergrad students, for projects that you want to do, anything that's about the love of learning, lots of different kinds of society. So, check into those. And sometimes that's not a huge amount of money, but it's there. This other thing of find a partner, I knew we were not going to have time to go into all of these. I keep a list, and a lot of times when I'm listening to NPR and they'll talk about the Lemonson Foundation does blah, 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 I'm like, cool. And I get back to my office and I put that in my Zotero database. And regularly they change what they're funding. So these are just some examples of nonprofits that fund things that go on in higher education. Sometimes systems change, sometimes smaller. Like the grant that we just did with math this past week, the money actually comes from the Lumina Foundation. I don't know if I put Lumina on here. I did, that's the first one. But Lumina typically doesn't want to fund individual institutions, but they fund larger groups. We have an Alliance for Better Teaching now. Corbin Campbell, who's at the Baker School of Education, is now running this national center on improving teaching. That came from Lumina money. And so there are so many different options for different kinds of nonprofit funding. And the thing, I had 2 points I wanted to make sure that I made, well, one I'll get to in a second. So, and I've said this to Laura, every dollar that is spent on a researcher has a $9 return on investment. And there's a great study that was done at the London School of Economics. They call it positive externality. So it's you look at what those people are being paid, like what they're working on, et cetera. So every dollar spent on a researcher, $9 societal return on investment. The number 2 is teachers. Every dollar you spend on a teacher, you get a $2 return on investment. And engineers also have a positive externality. You know what the lowest externality is?
Politicians.
Close. Lawyers. No offense, I know we have some law people here. It's just it's overall writ large across the sector, right? So anyway, but there are lots of different partners. There are people that fund things. This kind of work does matter. I put in, I want to make sure we have some time for questions, this idea of find a gap. And this is just some AU data that we have. Again, Richard Larberg will raise his hand, okay, and wave. If there's data that you need for something, we actually have a lot of ability in the Office of Undergraduate Education to find and disaggregate stuff. Let us know. And again, OIRA, so Robin Beeds, David Kibe, they've got a whole team. But I talked to David and Robin before I did this, and I don't want to commit them to everything, but they're really interested. If you know what your research question is, come to them, they might have data. And sometimes we have institutional data, like things like we have a fall new student check-in survey that has a very good response rate. And I meant to pull all of the questions, but I just didn't have time to pull them all in. But they ask different things about students. We're able to disaggregate based on college and school. If college is hard for them, where they might be struggling, are they financially insecure, and we can actually disaggregate this on a number of different student demographics. Other things I should say, yes, please.
Yeah, and I have a very well-organized data set going back to 2016, so 10 years this year. We include open-ended questions as well. We ask, what have you enjoyed the most about coming to AU? What have you enjoyed the least? So if you're curious about that, just let me know. It's Laurberg, Laurberg, and I can help get a data set to you if you want to see specifically what your group of students are loving and
Awesome. Start with the research questions. Yep.
Is there a graduate equivalent?
I don't know. Do we do a graduate student version? No, it's hard because the grad students are working so much more in their disciplines, but that might be something we can talk to Wendy about. See what Wendy and Jason. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
I also just wanted to know, Laura Marks from AU Government Relations, and I cover both federal and local government relations. I come from DC government, and we have a local DC budget that is now $20 billion a year. So there is a lot of money that gets granted out for community-focused projects, research, program evaluation. So if you see things that are happening here locally in DC that you're interested in, reach out to me. I am always happy to help connect you with agencies and programs, where there may be opportunities.
Awesome.
And we are in the middle of the mayoral election for the first time. We're going to have a new mayor for the first time in a dozen years. So some of these partnerships and grant relationships that have just kind of been on autopilot may be, sort of
Open back up.
heated in the coming years. So it's a good opportunity to kind of lean into that change.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
opportunity to grasp.
Well, because other places, sometimes they can tap into state money. We don't have a state, we have a district. And so, those fundings can be really good. The other data that we do have, a national survey on student engagement, so various years, we are deploying that again next year. And this looks at things like, I was able to go in yesterday and disaggregate, and I can look at students' major fields. So students in arts and humanities at AU, only about a third are interested or have done a research project with a faculty member. And in STEM disciplines, it is the opposite. 2/3 have or are interested in doing research with a faculty member. Why, right? Like there's a lot of research that can be done in arts and humanities. Campus climate surveys we have for various years. So how our students are navigating the college student experience. And this was a point that I wanted to make, and it kind of goes into with what Sarah was saying. In finding a gap, this is something that I found really successful before the current Trump administration, was whenever we find that students with certain demographic characteristics and intersectional identities are navigating college in different ways, because colleges were designed for white men, essentially. AU's a little different, but so those are things to think about. But we have to kind of be demographic equity is a little tough right now, but there are funding agencies that still want us to find the gaps and address the gaps. We also have graduation census, so where are students going after they're graduating? Those are some institutional data. I put in, I'm not going to click on it just for time, but OIRA, so our Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, if you go on their website, it will tell you the different kinds of reports that we have and all of the things that they do. We have a ton of institutional data that people don't always tap into. And if you're thinking about research pieces that can be really interesting, or every private institution in DC, we're pretty much all private institutions, we're all facing these enrollment demographics or something in the Washington Post every day about layoffs, et cetera. I'm wondering if there can also be networked ways, work with GW, work with Catholic, work with Gallaudet. Where are we seeing gaps together? And we might be able to work in networked ways to improve whatever it is we want to do. And I don't know if this is controversial. I thought I'd put it up here anyway. This upcoming academic program review is also going to generate a lot of data at the departmental level. Are there ways of using that? Like if there are places to see, okay, well, we've got this much demand right now, we've got some capacity. Are there places where some additional external resources, projects, et cetera, might be able to help us get more students into those certain areas? We were in Faculty Senate in here last week, and Nate Hirschberger was saying something about wanting to know who the incoming physics students were to start working on some anti-melt strategies. Cool. I want to know, what are you doing for your anti-melt strategies? Can those work? Can we, get some funding from the local physics society, right, to work on those kinds of things? So, if there's any kind of data that comes up. Just last piece, and you do have these slides, thinking about research questions, ways of elevating a problem, and sometimes that's not supposed to happen. Just a couple examples. Sometimes I think about this. Students that start in X field at AU, do they persist at AU in the major or field? Why or why not? And we've actually got some data about that. Mick Bentley has asked me this before, Matt. I think you've kept that data. Sometimes it's also we do Y thing. Is it working? Why or why not? Could we use Z resources to help? So external resources to help catapult a project. I look at larger reports sometimes just to see what's going on. Lumina Foundation always has some really good ones. They're also good researchers. EAB has a great report on student success priorities in the 2020s. And it kind of goes through different areas that include access and accommodation, AI, lots of different areas. Hanover Research does a lot. We actually have a partnership with Hanover Research. I don't know if Julie's going to talk about that later, but we can do one project at a time, and they'll help us find resources. And then Ithaca SR, they produce a lot of different reports and resources as well. The last thing I have was just other questions and topics, and I am supposed to ask you to fill out the survey, so I'll pull that back up in a minute. But I wanted to go back to here, just in case you didn't get these slides earlier, and now you're like, ooh, actually I want that. And we've got, I don't know, we're over on time, so maybe 1 minute. So any final things to talk about? Big picture, everybody has ideas. Our most limiting factor is often our time. But everybody has ideas, and if there are ways of working with others, finding a gap, that can really help us. UEAS is glad to be a partner as much as possible on anything that we can. And I'll be around all day if you want to talk anymore. But it's also lunchtime. So thank you all. Thank you.